Greetings to everyone tuning in. If this is your first time here, I'm Tom.
I'm Jala.
And we are a podcast dedicated to keeping you up to date with global events and occurrences while simultaneously daring to dive deeper into ideas or concepts that pique our interest. With that out of the way, welcome to Curious Comedy, where we are dedicated to truth and have nothing left to lose. Let's get into it. So the first thing I really wanted to talk to you about is a country called Kazakhstan. Now, why would I want to talk about Kazakhstan? The first thing is that it's wedged right in between China and Russia, and therefore has a very interesting geopolitical position. But more than that, there has been some really interesting things happening over the last about 2 years. Now, in 2019, the president of the country stepped down and was replaced by a new president. And one of his first acts in office was to rename the capital after the old president. And what this basically showed is that the people of the country were not getting a change of pace in the way that the country was ruled. They were ruled by an iron fist, an autocracy, and they were not moving towards a democracy, which is what the people were hoping for, since they are done being ruled by an iron fist, as one might understand. Now, this in itself is already not too pleasant for the people, but then something way worse happened. There was a cap set on the fuel prices, because, as most of you know, the prices of electricity and gas have been steadily rising ever since the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And because of this, a cap was set in place so the inflation wouldn't reach a point that the people of Kazakhstan couldn't sustain. But this cap was lifted in early January. And as a result, their most popular gas doubled in price overnight. Now, because of this, the country started becoming very upset with its leader. Riots followed, protests were imminent, and people took to the streets. Now, because people took to the streets, the whole country started becoming engulfed in chaos, and people started rallying next to the president's home, and it was actually set aflame. Then Kazakhstan had to call on help from Russia, and paratroopers came and they re-established order and suppressed the people of Kazakhstan.
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting, but indeed, you have just talked about the position of Kazakhstan and the fact that they have cheap energy, which, especially these times, could be very interesting. So, but I think that Kazakhstan could also be a tipping point, right? Because I think that it could strain the bilateral relationship between Moscow and Beijing. Yeah, you could ask yourself, why is that? Now, because Putin and Xi refer to each other as dear old friends, and numerous newspapers describe their relationship as being besties, and this is coming from the early days of Xi reign. Where Russia would always support China, and you have a lot of human rights abuse and stuff like that. So was kind of controversial. And Russia's foreign policy with respect to Kazakhstan could alter this relationship. I think I read it in the Financial Times, but it was a journalist who was arguing that they are besties, but only C is on the top of the food chain,
on the
right?
food chain, yeah.
Right. So
exactly.
So he's using Putin as long as it's beneficial for him.
Because I was wondering, perhaps the only reason that Kazakhstan isn't getting the same treatment that Ukraine has been getting is because of China's influence and their stakes in the country, which is basically imagine being in the middle of a tug-of-war between China and Russia. I'd rather be anywhere else.
Yeah, no, but I think it's a very good point you make, because Russia doesn't have the freedom to do everything they want to do, because they have to make sure that they are not not helping China. Let's put it that way, because then there could be repercussions. And then you could ask yourself, how valuable is it to do the things that I want? So there's a trade-off for Putin, indeed, which is maybe different in Ukraine. But then again, you got the Europe thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the only way he has been able to go after Ukraine is because of the Europe loophole.
Why is that?
in the way that they're not part of the NATO, right? That's the only way that they've been able to invade their own country, according to them, but Ukraine. And I was wondering why they wouldn't expand other directions, since, for example, Kazakhstan would be a very nice vantage point in territory. But then you see that because of its tight relationship with China, that it's actually, I mean, I can't read Putin's mind, but it's more interesting for them to look into the resources that Ukraine could give them.
Yeah.
And did you see about the new ballots that have been going around? People in Ukraine can vote whether they want to be a part of Russia now.
Yeah. I thought it was like a sick psychological game.
Yeah,
because
me too.
It really reminded me of the World War II, right? So with Hitler. So like kind of the thing that you had with the Jews, that he would create a system in where like the Jews would fight each other, right? So they would never fight against him as a collective. And it felt the same over here, because I had a feeling like, imagine you are living in Ukraine, you're getting these you have to vote. Okay, now you can never give a great answer or a good answer, because if you're being honest and you're saying no, I don't want to be Russian, then they know by your vote that you are someone to take care of.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is always in your self-interest to say no, I want to be Russian.
Yeah.
And then Putin will say, look, 80% of the people say they want to be Russian. So it's like a sick game, and where I would, as a Ukrainian citizen, would always say I want to be Russian, because I never know what they will do with the data.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the real scary part about it, indeed, is that he's turning their own people against them, and trying to turn it in such a way that the common man will think that he has convinced the Ukraine, after countless bombings, that yes, indeed, you know what? The smell of sulfur has been pleasant. I would like to be Russian. It's ridiculous, and frankly, I'm almost appalled that it's been able to go on this long. Really, I mean, we're supposed to be the big united front of the world, right? But how united are we really?
Yeah, that's a good question, but you don't want to overdo things in the short term. I think in the midterm we will.
Yeah, fair enough. But then I read history books and I saw never again a bunch of times. But here we are. Right.
Yeah, but I have a feeling that after 70 years of just living in society, like a public consciousness is going away, right?
Yeah, I think that's perhaps maybe one of the only good things that come of this, is that indeed public opinion has to enter back into the space, otherwise we're next. But
yeah,
let's move on to our next point.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the U.S.-China relationship, and what we really want to do is give you guys a weekly update about the U.S.-China relationship, but we have a feeling that sometimes some context is missing to really understand how some power dynamics are shifting. And because the U.S. and China are competing for being the leader of the world, they need power, right? To be the leader of the world, you need power, and to have power, you need, at least in the beginning, money. So let's talk a bit about that. So let's discuss how they make money, by discussing like maybe at first like the Western capitalist system, because sometimes you hear a lot people talking about the capitalist system, and it's like almost common sense, but then in the end you ask people, okay, what is it? And then there is a lack of definition, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
So let's start.
People assume that they know more than they actually do.
Yeah, which is one of the you pay a price for that pitfall, I think.
Exactly.
And if you don't, then society does. So, okay, but let's give a definition to capitalism, and I try to not be boring. So capitalism in essence means that as long as assets are privately owned and people, money and assets are free to move, then capital will be allocated to these projects that are the most productive. Or to put it differently, money will flow to these projects that generate the most, right? Then competition will drive down prices and will increase the quality of the product or service. Therefore, names like laissez-faire but also free markets mean just what the name says, and mean just leave it to the market, and the invisible hand will fix it. And this invisible hand is a concept coined by Adam Smith, who states that the invisible hand, or like the invisible way markets function, will be the best if all people act in their own self-interest, because that will also serve the needs of others. So the idea is that if everyone is free to do and move how they would like, they could specialize in something, and he or she has something to trade and could therefore maintain themselves. Now, the idea that markets are completely free, so also without regulation, isn't the case, as we all know. So we know that regulation exists, and in fact, it defines and states not only the framework in which we have all agreed how we should treat each other, but it also defines how markets should function. And currently there are like two main trends in traditional finance. So the first is stakeholder capitalism, and the second is ESG. And their objectives are the same or similar, but the way they are used is completely different. So let's start with stakeholder capitalism, and I will keep it really short because I understand that attention spans these days aren't that long.
Yeah, exactly.
Same comes from me, so I'm not an exception. But okay, stakeholder capitalism is about taking into account the interests of more stakeholder than just the stockholder, and the stockholder is the one who has a share, right, of the company.
Exactly.
So, like in general, what are stakeholders? Stakeholders is like the collective term for all people or actors that are involved in one way or another with the business of an enterprise. So, examples of stakeholders can be for any company, like customers, suppliers. Right? You need to buy some product from your suppliers and then want to sell it to, for example, customers. Yeah. But you also have your environment and all people that are in some way connected or related to your business activities. So in short, stakeholder capitalism makes sure that everyone that has an interest in the company will have an easier time seeing how that company makes decisions that affect him or her, right? So one of a short example that I can give you that I know of for stakeholder capitalism is a proposal that suggested that we should it would be almost a requirement. So requiring companies to distribute at least a certain proportion of the shares to employees, and to give these employees who are receiving those shares also a place on the board. So to make sure that now you have a lot of companies, say Ahold, almost like none of the employees has like big shareholdings to such an extent that they can really influence business policy. And what this proposal is saying is like, okay, if you would require companies to distribute at least a certain proportion of their shares to their employees, then automatically the influence of those employees on their business they are working for is greater.
Yeah, exactly. And then they can't just be told what to do, they actually have a say in what happens.
Exactly, so it would be more equal. Right? It's like a fight against inequality.
I'm a big fan of that idea. Yeah.
Okay, great. So
for somebody working in a company like Ahold, where you have no say of what happens, and even your manager gets told what to do, I think it's a welcome change for everybody.
Yeah, no, I think as well. So that's also why it is a big trend, right?
So that's stakeholder capitalism.
Stakeholder capitalism.
Gotcha.
So in practice, stakeholder capitalism, in comparison to the traditional way we did it, like let's say traditional capitalism, is just a reporting difference. And just with stakeholder capitalism, you will just use the same financial statements and the same financial reporting as in the traditional capitalism, but now you add some extra information. So like, okay, how many shares are held, or how much shares do your employees hold, right? That would be something that you can report.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you give extra information, and that extra information is useful, and that is like the trend from traditional to stakeholder capitalism. Okay. Naming and reporting all the influences that you have on different stakeholders.
Right.
So the different topic is ESG, and it's a hot topic but also a tricky one. And in general, ESG is about taking into account environmental, social, but also governance factors when making an investment decision. And this could be from the perspective of a company, so in what project should we invest, but it could also be from the perspective of an investor, so what companies do I want to invest in. And Now, it is really important to make a distinction in input and output, and it sounds maybe a little bit weird, but I take you with me.
Bear with me.
Bear with me. That would be better. Thank you. So, ESG as an input is like saying that you would take into account ESG aspects, kind of risks, when making an investment decision. So, for example, should Shell invest in like a new oil field, right? Mm-hmm. And normally you would say, okay, how much risk is there, how much reward? But when we take into account ESG, you will say, okay, well, we have more than just business risk and kind of macroeconomic risk, because we also got some ESG responsibility, which we could quantify as a sort of a risk. So when making an investment decision about a new oil field, you would in an ESG setting also add to your standard model the ESG related risks. So for example, compensation for maintaining the environment in which Shell operates, or compensation for environments that are influenced by Shell's business operations. Seeing ESG as an output is about saying that as an investor you demand more from businesses than just returns. And so you want to have an insight in what companies contribute to ESG related issues. And you could say, like you see a lot these days, that some investors will only invest in companies that score certain points on certain indicators, which are prone to be arbitrary due to a lack of standardization of measures. And this is like the advantage but also the disadvantage, because like the promise of this is that by including ESG, I as an investor can distinguish two companies on the basis of how they perform on ESG related issues. And this enables me to say, for example, that without ESG, I don't care if I invest in Shell or BP, because they both generate, let's say, for example, 8% return for the same risk. But with ESG, I do care if I invest in a Shell or a BP, because they may generate the same return for the same risk, but maybe Shell scores much better on ESG related issues. So for example, Shell takes better care of their environment.
Okay.
And then I have an extra dimension to make a distinction, right?
Yeah, exactly. So just I get the difference between that and stakeholder capitalism, but in essence it also gives you a better insight and gives you a more informed decision. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's a fair point. So ESG and stakeholder capitalism are really closely related. They are both trends. They try to improve capitalism and the influence of capitalism. But the difference is that just with stakeholder capitalism is just a reporting thing, and with ESG, we are saying, yeah, we see that when businesses are free to report, there is not something big happening, right? So when saying, okay, you have to measure some things in which you perform ESG related issues, then you can really see, okay, I don't want to hear you talk about it, I want to see you do it, make the impact. So it is a difference between using words and having impact. Stakeholder capitalism is about using words and saying what you are doing, and ESG is about trying to quantify that and really say, okay, what is your influence? So the idea is that by identifying these ESG related issues and giving companies ESG scores, companies can compete in more than just risk and reward, which is the traditional paradigm. And so namely compete in those things that we value as a society, which is then captured in ESG. So now the difficulty with ESG is, for one, that you should distinct ESG as an input or an output. But secondly, and this is like a real big issue now, is like what indicators are used to measure a certain score. And so in short, the lack of standardization. And you can see why this is problematic. So take, for example, a company that wants to know his environmental score, so an E and ESG. Say that Moody's, which is just a company that gives those score, would use the relative amount of CO2 that is filtered. And if you would capture 10% of your emissions, then you would get a score of 1 out of 10. If you would capture 100%, then you would get a 10 out of 10, right?
Sounds simple enough.
If S&P Global, which is another company giving those credits, would use the number of polluting liters of chemicals, you can see that this same company would get get two different environmental scores, and this dilutes the incentive for a company to improve on this E and ESG.
Yeah.
So because the one is saying you are doing good, the other is saying you're doing not so good. So
Yeah, exactly.
so what is the truth then? And this is now what is like one of the main issues, and you can see like in academic literature that some finance professors are now trying to find a common framework in which they try to find the common indicators of the biggest companies in the world and their frameworks, using those frameworks to give a score, and then trying to find the overlap between all those frameworks and say, okay, this is the bare minimum, and every company should use this, and then you can extend on that, right?
Yeah,
So that is a big of a thing. So maybe a question for you, and maybe also for next week, because I can see that I consumed a lot of time. Like, what are the main differences between like the Western capitalism and its trend towards a stakeholder capitalism and ESG, and China's social one-person-led system? And maybe it's hard for you now to give an answer, but could you imagine that like the top 1% of best performers of the Western world would choose to work in like a Chinese-led government?
Oh, it is indeed something you don't just want to ramble on about or give a half-assed answer to. So, okay. So first of all, what I thought was really interesting is that you could almost see it as a libertarian policy, right? We have, for example, you were talking about Shell earlier, so we can take them into account. People have lobbied for coal and oil for like as long as we remember, right? Because we figured out they were bad a while ago. Try to keep it hush hush. Try to make as much money from it as possible. And in reasonably recent years, it has come to light. What are the damages? What are the effects that it can have, etc., etc. And now, paired with that, we get ESG and stakeholder capitalism as mostly ESG in that regard. We get an option to improve that and see how can we do that better. What are incentives? What are ways that we can standardize this? But I think unless there is a financial motivator for a company to indeed get that ESG status, get that 100%, get that 90%, whatever it is, and try to physically or fiscally motivate themselves to do that, which could also be motivated again by the people that actually choose because of ESG. But I'm going to go on a tangent if I start there. I think it's a very interesting proposition, and I think with ESG I could definitely see the whole market getting a big change. And as far as I understand it, this is not happening in China whatsoever. Or is it?
No, it is not, because like in China they have some big global ambitions and saying, okay, every 5 years we have those goals or those objectives we're trying to accomplish. Where in the West, as you know, we have governments that are elected and like it's kind of arbitrary. It's just people will vote on the policy that is being made on the basis of the prospect of engaging the most people. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy if you think about it. But sure, so that doesn't work. And as you can see, like we have like governments for 40-50 years, and like purchasing power has decreased, living standards has decreased. Of course we live, and we should be very grateful and thankful that we live in this great country, but we had like the golden age almost 300 years ago. The fact that 300 years after being one of the greatest nations that has ever lived, then saying, but we still have great roads and we still have great medicines. But you were like top notch. So
exactly.
If you have lose your spot while you had like a competitive advantage, that means you're fucking stupid.
Exactly. So that means you've been getting worse ever since then. Right?
Exactly right.
So, but we were great then, and we still have some of those great things. Except for everything else that's getting worse.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a beep argument.
Yeah, no, so you're right. So it is. So that is to answer your question. That is a big difference. So we say we are free and you can do whatever you want, and therefore everyone is acting in their own self-interest, as we just had seen, like the concept coined by Adam Smith, the invisible hand. That would be perfect, but as we know in practice, and that is also something Adam Smith said. That is also when you take into account completely free markets.
Yeah.
When you use regulation, then markets aren't free, and so his whole concept,
the philosophy, falls apart.
Exactly. You are not having the same assumptions, so you shouldn't assume that the results would be the same. Exactly. That is like basic thinking. So therefore, I think that in China they don't have like the same trend, but they are saying like poverty is a big thing. We don't want that.
Yeah, especially if you want to be one of the richest or the richest country in the world.
Yeah, but I mean, they are like one of the only. They are the first country that has been able to lift hundreds of millions of people above the poverty rate, and that is something that India isn't able to accomplish.
No, I agree.
Which is monumental. Which is UK, right? UK territory, which has Western. I know it is maybe, but if you look from a history perspective,
yeah, sure,
they have British influence, and of course,
most speak English, right? So they have access into the international markets.
Yeah, and China as well, but yeah, it's just that they are more. It's more dictatorial, right? So they are more focused on, okay, we are going to do this for the next 5 years, and everyone should fall in line. Yeah. And if you don't, we will punish you. And here we say, no, everyone is free to do whatever you want, and we will only punish you if you don't you hold yourself to regulation. It doesn't matter if it's in a societal benefit, right? It doesn't matter if money is money.
Exactly.
So that is a big difference, I think.
Yeah, no.
China is looking more than just money.
It almost feels strange to say, but it feels in that regard that China is a lot more unified. And I mean, many hands make light work. So indeed, if you have a country of let's say it's a billion in English, right? Yeah, a billion capable people all striving towards the same goal. That is a lot more significant than indeed a bunch of people just living their life, c'est la faire.
Yeah, no, but that's, I think, and we talked about it, I think, a few days ago, where there was like this research saying that, so was a performing some research about, okay, what are some ambitions of young children in China and in America, right? And the answer in China would be an engineer. No. Where the answer, or a rocket scientist, where the answer in America would be a YouTuber.
Yeah, or an artist or painter.
Yeah, no, but the number one was YouTuber.
Wow.
Not influencer, YouTuber.
Oh wow, that's very specific.
Yeah, and so that says a lot, right? So if you look at it, so China has already a technological,
advantage.
Yeah, advantage, and there is a big chance that they will not only hold that position, but will
expand it.
Yeah, and then if you think about that, then why would you, as like a top student at Stanford, going to work for like Apple or Microsoft? Then I would say, then let's go to China.
Yeah, no,
because there are the best people working, right?
Yeah, no, I agree, and we talked about it a little bit before, not on the podcast, but the way that China is indeed perhaps more appealing in a sense of wanting to be the best of the best, and financial motivation, that it could drive you to go to China simply because indeed, well, people fall in line, which is also great for you if you want your business to run smooth. But indeed, they have more computing power, they have more people power, they have more access to means, which means that if you are indeed a extremely high functioning person with high intelligence, high capability, high functionality, you could and probably would thrive in China. However, you are also selling your rights to certain privacies and certain freedoms that we take for granted here in the West sometimes. So I don't know. as I put it before, I think it would be a great point. I think the greatest entrepreneurs, the greatest business managers of America might prefer to work in China, but I doubt they can can convince their workforce to come with them.
Yeah, fair enough. No, that's a great argument.
Let's move on to the next subject. Okay, we're going to talk about Queen Elizabeth for a little bit. As most of you know, if not all of you know, she has passed away. It happened on the 8th of September, and her funeral will be held on the 19th of September. Now, in between this area of time, there was a period of mourning held in the UK. In this period of mourning, a few very interesting things happened, and I would love to talk you through it a little bit. Now, the events that took place spiraled from strange to bizarre to outright malignant really quickly, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. We started off at Morrison's, which is a local grocery store chain, and the first thing they did was remove all sounds from the grocery store as a sign of respect from the Queen. But it's not what you might think. They removed the beeps at the self-checkout, any music that playing, and even announcements went too far. Which I don't know if it created more respect for the Queen, but it definitely increased theft. Now, next thing that happened, all kinds of things shut down. So a lot of things are cancelled, like soccer games, bike racks were unable to be taken. You can, for example, think of things like a QR code on a bike or a museum. All these sorts of things are closed now. It goes a lot further, but then weather announcement got cancelled, petitions on the government website got cancelled, sporting events got cancelled, and there was a decent outrage at this because, of course, people don't want everything to stop functioning, even when something drastic like this happens. But the worst of the worst is that on the day of the Queen's death, the funeral, almost everything that you can conceive of will be closed. Medical appointment got cancelled, people's x-ray, people with a chronic illness couldn't see their doctor, food banks got closed, and even your own funeral could get postponed because of the Queen's death. So, if you were ever unsure whether you and the Queen had the same rights, at least on paper, think again, because even in death she gets to cut to the line. Now, we also happen to live in a monarchy. We're from the Netherlands, if you hadn't been able to tell yet. And we would love to discuss a little bit about how we have experienced having a king and whether we support the idea of a monarchy in the modern age. So, Jada, please let us hear your thoughts.
Yeah, we do have a king. We call him
Prince Pils.
Prince Pils, yeah. So, yeah. We decided to talk with some respect, right? So let's.
Did we?
Yeah. Okay. Now, so yeah, Prince Pils. Yeah, to be honest, I don't really like him, and that is because I feel like he doesn't want to be king, and I don't feel like, but I know that the majority of people also doesn't want him as a king. Mm-hmm. They don't even want a monarchy like in general. So I have a feeling like, okay, you don't want to be king, we don't want you there, now leave. I mean, it's very, very simple, plain and simple. But I think it's like almost like kind of a show, right? So I think the only reason that he is still in the position is just that our parents have always believed the story that having a king is great for your country, because then you can you have someone who can represent himself. Well, yeah, we think like, okay, Mark Rutte can also get Instagram, right? And then he can represent the Netherlands. Yeah, I mean, monarchy isn't necessary for that.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. There's plenty of countries that don't have a monarchy that do just fine.
Yeah, and to be honest, I do think that for some countries, let's say for example China, it does make a difference having a king. And it's like same with a big corporation, right? So the CEO is never having never performing the interviews himself. He's always sending someone else. Why? Because if something goes wrong, he can always say, I didn't want him to say that. Mm-hmm. And we don't know, maybe it was his whole advice to say that, right? You don't know that. Yeah. So I do think that that is an important one. So in some countries it has an influence and it has an advantage, but right now, and especially if you look at history, you look, for example, at Louis XIV, like the Sun King, or I don't know how you say that in English, but like the Sun King of France, he was, in my opinion, really a leader. So back in the day, you as like the monarch of your country, as the leader of your country, he was the one who would go. He was the first to encounter dangerous things. He was the first to cross a border, right? So I do think that then having a king can be inspirational. But our king is in no way inspirational. I mean, that man has 2 speeches a year, and I think that more than 80% is falling asleep, and that 15 minutes the man is talking.
Yeah.
And then he didn't even write the thing himself, right? So then I'm like, you are just not capable, right? Having a king, maybe, but we definitely want someone who is capable of doing so.
No, exactly.
Yeah. So, but how do you feel?
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of the points you're making, especially in the regard that he is a king that doesn't seem fit to be a king. Indeed, in that he doesn't really strike you as somebody that takes up a room or really exerts dominance. But even less than that, he doesn't. You've never. I cannot recall a single time I've heard him give an inspirational speech or say a beautiful quote or give an idea of how he would love to see the nation transform, what his morals and values are, and how. None of that. I mean, it's even unspoken of, and I think, especially in the recent years, we've seen an increasing rise of people that have gotten disdain towards Prince Pils. And most people now are well already, but even more now, are starting to get more and more upset with his presence as a king. And even his daughter refused her princess title, right? Which just shows you how deep it goes, and really that it's becoming more of a trend for them, and logically so. I would say that they don't want their position as king because they realize what it is, and that it's 99% of it is semantics, and people are also done with that and don't want to spend any more money on it. So that's why you also now see protests of it, and it's becoming more and more of a thing. And I think if nothing happens this year, the next year the protests will be even bigger, and it will eventually escalate.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of time and nothing else. And I think, especially because of the death of Queen Elizabeth, that because of that, people have realized perhaps the fragility of a monarch, and have perhaps come to the conclusion that if we really all decide we don't want a king, then we don't have to have a king. And sometimes I think we forget, even though we live in a modern age, if the people want change, if we want it enough, we can make change.
Yeah. No, but that is a great point. But I think that is something we have lost a long time ago.
Yeah, indeed. But we are here to bring it back.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. No, great. I would love to dive deeper, but time-wise, I think it is maybe better to move on. So shall I introduce the next
Take the
topic?
floor.
Thank you. So I think this is also the last topic. Yeah. So and it's about Disney and ESPN. So Disney, then we are talking about the Walt Disney Company, which is one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world. We all know it from Cinderella and also Mickey Mouse and stuff like that. So they are being in business from, I think, 1950. So it's like almost, I would say almost 100 years, but that is an exaggeration. So so what happened? The news title was that there was an activist investor who bought. So the Walt Disney Company is like a publicly traded company, and so everyone is free to buy shares, and then an activist investor, so just an investor, that bought like almost a minority stakes, almost 5%. Then you have to make sort of an announcement to the SEC that you have acquired a certain amount of shares, and then everyone will be up to date. That you are, because you want that so that not someone is able to collect 51% of a company without everyone knowing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I always thought there had to be some kind of.
It's really strict.
Yeah, figured.
Yeah.
Figured.
So and an activist investor, because buying those shares just makes you an investor. But what makes an investor an activist investor is just that this investor then with the shares that he has bought wants to alter business strategy or business operation. And so in this case the investor was an active investor because he sent a proposal to the CEO of the company or the board of the company with that the fact that he thought that it would be smart to really spin off the ESPN business. And so Disney has a couple of businesses. One is streaming, the other is film and cartoonish cartoons, and then you have like sports rights
and gaming. Yeah,
but sports rights, those are the big things. And then you have sports rights, right? So ESPN is about the sports right, and now you saw that an activist investor said something in the trend of you can better just spin it off, because as a standalone company the sports rights business will be more valuable. Then the day after, the CEO of Disney responded with a note and said like, okay, I hear you, but we will not honor your proposal, and that is for two reasons. So one is because we do think that it is a growth business, which is like they are on the same page because they both believe that. But, and that is a second argument, it is a growth business, but it is also, at least that is what the CEO of Disney believed, a business which can generate a lot of synergies with the current and existing businesses. So you could imagine that you can then offer like for example a family who has some children, they maybe have Disney Plus, and then you can say okay, normally ESPN someone would not buy it for €10 a month, but now you can say okay, if you already have Disney Plus you will get it for €5. And then you will have some dads in the world and say, okay, €5 a month is worth watching football, right?
Exactly.
Stuff like that. So that is what his belief was, and so then the day after, so the second day of after the proposal, like the offer was rejected, or not even officially rejected, but like the activist investor withdrew it because resented it because he was like, okay, I need a full board, I need the compliance of the CEO, right?
Yeah,
because
the CEO already said that he is not on board, then
no. But you have to remember that. I mean, that is a whole different topic. But if you, for example, look at Toyota, there or SoftBank, there you can see that some investors are so powerful, and they will do it. They will organize it in such a manner that they can just dispel the CEO and get a new one. So it is possible, because this is corporate finance. You have the managers of a company, you have the owners of a company, and that is always a conflict of interest, because the managers want to build as big as a company and they want a big bonus as they can get. And an investor just wants to have the managers perform in such a manner that those interested are aligned.
Yeah.
So that is like
okay, but it is food for thought.
It's food for thought, yeah, indeed. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit was just that you could see that since 2010 there is like a kind of a trend in which big money, private equity groups are buying into sports rights, but also football clubs and stuff like that. And maybe as an extra addition to that, like. Sports was always for the common man the thing in which he could relax, he could be entertained, right? And since the sort of the Roman Empire, we always have said, okay, you should not take a man's bread and water and his entertainment, so food and circuses, because if you do that, then chaos will emerge. And so I was wondering what your thinking about this is, because we see that big money is going into the entertainment business, going to those clubs, football clubs that are which are really connected to the locals. What do you think, and do you believe this is a good development? Do you think big money should be free to buy up anything that makes money, or do you think there are some limits to that?
Sorry, I'm not that big of a soccer or football fan as is, so I think the fact that there is as much money as there is in soccer and the people that play it, I think is already redonkulous. But without taking my bias into question, I think it's probably a good thing that you can buy parts of clubs. I mean, I wouldn't want you, but you have the rule of only buying 5%, right? Or less than 5%, or you have to make an appeal or something along those lines. We can talk about it in another episode. I think it's a good thing, and I genuinely do believe that it is indeed a growth business, and I think sports is not going anywhere, right? It has been big since documented history, and I think it will continue to be big. Bodybuilding is now bigger than ever. The Olympics still get like tons of views, and people will always thrive to be the best at something. Even if your competition is 7 billion, people still want to be the gold medalist, right? And I think it is that drive that characterizes the human spirit, or at least a really beautiful part of it. And if people want to invest great money into that, so be it. I just hope it remains to have its beautiful essence instilled still. So that's my point.
Yeah, but you could argue that the moment that big money is into it, it's about making more money, and that is always a different way of reasoning and thinking than it was before, because before that was not only the goal. So there was always more focus on things that are not money, and now with the big money, for sure there's more focus on money. So the whole thing, and I think if you talk with a supporter, even here in Rotterdam and Feyenoord, I mean, he can make like $1,000 a month. But if a ticket costs €100, he will still go because he feels that is his life, and that says enough, right?
Yeah, no, indeed, that is a fair point you're making. I hadn't considered that yet. Indeed, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love sucking money out of Feyenoord supporters as much as the next guy, but. I indeed do not like the idea of it becoming one big capitalistic game where everything is about money. But I think it is up to the supporters of the clubs and the people that organize the things, and indeed the fans, right? The business doesn't stand without the fans. So it comes back to the idea of the power to the people, and we have to take matters into our own hands. If you are forced to pay a ridiculous price for a ticket, then you have to make a union and say, okay, we're just not going to pay this ridiculous price for a ticket. I mean, if you can manage to convince, let's say 1,000 people that would normally come into the game that to just be a gap in a stadium, it will be very noticeable, right? And then a ball starts rolling, something starts happening. But if the prices keep going up and you keep paying the price will keep going up because they are just seeing what they can get away with. So at some point you just have to say no more. Yeah, when that point will come, that is to see. we will see soon enough, right?
Yeah. If you say chaos, then we know it's there.
Yeah, exactly. Right, I mean, we see plenty of chaos when it comes to soccer fans, but
that's true, especially Feyenoord in
Rotterdam.
No, I wanted to say in Roma. Or what was it where they broke the whole fountain, right?
I hadn't caught that. I know that they've probably broken the single here before in the in the Koala.
Okay, but right?
Yeah, I think we're ready to finish up. everybody, thank you for tuning in so much. We hope that it was you were able to keep up with the episode. We sure enjoyed it and hope you do too. And hopefully we can see you again next time. Have a great morning, evening or night.
Bye.